Hello, BookTube. I was out earlier today with the Bean on a walk, just an ordinary walk on the sidewalk. She doesn't really care much about covering ground in the wilderness or anything like that. She really wants to go where there's a chance that she'll meet people that she can scream at to pat her. But we were out on the sidewalk. It was very early. It was right after 9 in the morning, and the mail truck driver pulled over and handed me some packages. He said, "I saw you there with the dog, and I'm sure I'll have more throughout the day, but I thought as long as you're here, I might as well hand you these." So he handed me 3 packages, which cracked me up. It's not the first time it's happened. I remember it happened once with I was with a young friend who had no idea that anything like that was possible, and he went on for months via email saying that I was the only person he'd ever heard of who went out for a walk and accumulated books. But I have, as a result of that, the mail truck guy is working out very well. He's a very nice guy. And as a result of that, I have 3 books to do here before any of the rest of the day. This is U.S. mail. This is coming to me before FedEx, before UPS, just because he happened to see me. So I thought we'd go through it, and it ends with a box. So could be good stuff in here. Let's see. All right, what do we got here first? Harvard University Press. Comes out in early November. This is Matthew Pressman's On Press, The Liberal Values That Shaped the World. In the 1960s and 1970s, the American press embraced a new way of reporting and selling the news. The causes were many: the proliferation of television, pressure to rectify the news media's dismal treatment of minorities and women, accusations of bias from left and right, and the migration of influenced subscribers to the suburbs, of affluent subscribers to the suburbs. As Matthew Pressman's timely history reveals, during these tumultuous decades, the core values that held the profession together broke apart, and the distinctive characteristics of contemporary journalism emerged. I wonder what he thinks those core values are. Simply reporting the facts was no longer enough. In a country facing assassinations, the failing war in Vietnam, and presidential impeachment, reporters recognized a pressing need to interpret and analyze events for their readers. Objectivity and impartiality, the cornerstones of journalistic principle, were not jettisoned, but they were reimagined. Okay, all right. Journalists' adoption of adversarial relationship with the government and big business, along with sympathy for the dispossessed, gave their reporting a distinctly liberal drift. Yet at the same time, soft news, lifestyle, arts, entertainment, moved to the forefront of editors' concerns as profits took precedent over politics. Okay, all right. Well, you couldn't get more timely than that. I don't know that the author was thinking of that when he wrote the book. But the role of the press is it's an election-swaying issue, and that the author might not have known that. But I'm going to know a lot of the names in here. This is incredible. Okay, this comes out in early November. This is a finished copy, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to read it today because it's pretty close to home. So let's see. Let's see if this next one is a big one of these cardboard things. What have we got here, Bean? What is this? Oh! Oh, fantastic. Oh, wonderful. Okay. This is a finished copy. I think this comes out in November as well. Let's see what the date is on this thing. No, this is out already. This is, or maybe it comes out tomorrow. I loved it. I've already read it. I'll read you about it. I'll tell you about it. I don't know that you've seen it on this channel, but I thought it was fantastic. If you love historical fiction, you're going to love this book. This is by Teresa Ann Fowler, and it is A Well-Behaved Woman. This is a novel about the Vanderbilts with a very nice cover design and the decal edges. Let's see here. What have we got here? Okay, so this novel, A Well-Behaved Woman, is her follow-up to Z, her novel about Zelda Fitzgerald. And it tackles another woman history remembers through a patriarchal lens. Alma Vanderbilt Belmont, known as an extravagant socialite of New York's Gilded Age. In the author's hands, we learn Alva was a whip-smart renegade who fought tirelessly for women's suffrage, was one of the founders of the National Women's Party, and was deeply involved in the building of New York's grand houses. She divorced the powerful Vanderbilt, who cheated on her endlessly and later married for love. On April 12, 2016, Equal Pay Day, President Barack Obama established the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument in Washington, D.C., honoring both Alva and Alice Paul. And it doesn't mention on this pub sheet, but I'm assuming that because of that fact, President Trump's administration has earmarked that monument for demolition in public. We'll see. I don't imagine it'll be standing by the time his 24 years in office are over. The author spent 3 years researching and writing this book, and came to Alva as a subject somewhat reluctantly. And this is her quote, I guess. As was true when I first thought of writing about Zelda Fitzgerald in my previous novel, Z, on initial acquaintance, I didn't like Alva. This is an impression shared by many, many people in Gilded Age New York. I have a feeling there's a but coming, though. Described as pushy, selfish, overly ambitious, materialistic, and a social climber. Yes, 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 and yes. She didn't seem like someone I would want to write about. But as with Zelda, I discovered that the evidence didn't match the reputation. So then, who was Alva really? Okay, well, it depends on what you call evidence and what you choose not to look at. but it doesn't matter. The Alva Vanderbilt in this book is well, it's important to remember, as in all historical fiction, the Alva Vanderbilt in this book is a historical creation. She's a creation of historical fiction. This is not the same thing as a biography. This is the author crafting a picture and then conveying it. That's what historical fiction does. That's the caveat that historical fiction fans have to keep in mind. That caveat applies no matter how long the author's note in the back is, detailing what is true and what is not. Famous example from eons ago was the enormous 1,000-page novel Freedom by William Safire, a journalist who wrote a gigantic doorstop of an American Civil War novel. And at the end of the book, when his novel was over, he included something he called an underbook, which was basically an enormous, detailed dissection of every single thing in his novel that was true and that was invented. And I saw that, I reviewed the book, and I wanted to tell him. I wanted to send him a letter, because there was no internet at the time. I wanted to send him a letter and say, you could have saved yourself the trouble. Because it doesn't matter how much of that documentation you do, you are dramatizing these events, and that inherently fictionalizes them. Better just to trust your readers. But I think most readers of historical fiction know that, right? That they're not getting, this is not a photograph. So, so you will be getting a picture of Mrs. Vanderbilt in these pages. But it's an incredibly good picture. Not accurate, necessarily, not in all points, but good in the way that great historical fiction gives you the sense of the time, the sense of what was in the air, the sense of how people behaved when they weren't in front of cameras. In that sense, it's very good. This is a very enjoyable historical novel. And then we get the box, which is heavy enough so that it might be a finished copy as well. And then we'll be done with this bizarrely early mail haul. Imagine the U.S. mail getting to me before UPS does. That never happens. I told this guy, I told my new mail truck driver, I will not let this become an expectation. I will not be waiting at the door. Oh my, okay. Oh, all right. Okay, this is another finished copy. This is, I believe, due next in November, and this is another piece of historical fiction, and also quite enjoyable. And also, it's everything that we just said about Alva Vanderbilt is true 20 times over for this next one. So we'll just rehash that conversation, because it's my job to be repetitive. My job to be repetitive. Yes, okay, this comes out in early November. And this is The Splendor Before the Dark by Margaret George. It's a lovely finished copy, very somber finished copy with Roman fresco end papers. And this is the second part of her two-novel sequence writing about the Emperor Nero. If you can hear me over the chaos in the background. Oh, my savage little dog destroying my mail. She wrote The Confessions of Young Nero, which I reviewed a little while ago. I think it was last year or the year before that. And that was the story of the youth, Nero's youth and ascent to the throne of Rome. And this is the story of his emperorship all the way to its end. And those of you who are not maybe up on your Roman history, Nero's had a bloody end, like a great many of the Julio-Claudians, and what was immediately characterized, in fact, was characterized before he died, as a preening, insane, megalomaniac tyrant. And the project of these two books, on Margaret George's part, is to convey a completely different Nero. A misunderstood artist, a good person. History has maligned. Let me see what we have here. In last year's The Confession of Young Nero, Margaret George set out to reveal the truth about the last member of Julius Caesar's dynasty, Emperor Nero. In her novel, she cast aside the tyrannical, hedonistic ruler of popular history to recast Nero as he truly was, a naive boy who took the throne at 16, a fervent artist and athlete, and a product of his circumstances who came to power through his mother's sheer force of will. But after 10 years in power, Rome begins to burn. Nero's naivete is finally quashed. It only took 10 years. And he must rely on himself to stay on the throne where his mother first placed him, or die. The Splendor Before the Dark picks up at the end of the Empire's halcyon days during the ill-fated final 4 years of Nero's short life, as he faces his biggest test, the Great Fire of Rome, hence the cover. As entire swaths of the city are reduced to rubble, rumors of Nero's complicity in the blaze start to sow unrest among the populace and the politicians. For better or worse, Nero's fate is now tied to Rome's, and he vows to rebuild it as a city that will stun the world. But there are those who find his rampant quest for glory dangerous. Throughout the empire, false friends and spies conspire against him. It is a stunning revelation for the young emperor. Who knew? Having imagined himself surrounded by loyal and like-minded friends, Nero begins to understand the true precipitousness of his power. He will either survive the web of betrayals that is the Roman court, or be ensnared and remember as the last radiance of the greatest dynasty the world has ever known. And I read this. I read the first one, loved it. I read this one, I loved it. I would quibble with the pub sheet just a bit. The Julio-Claudian dynasty was not the greatest dynasty the world has ever known. But the Julio-Claudian dynasty was the greatest dynasty the world had ever known up until that point. I don't think you can really make... Well, actually, I shouldn't say you can't really make a case otherwise, because a great many of you will disagree with me, but I think that it's pretty obvious that the greatest dynasty in the history of the world is the House of Windsor. If we include among the things that account for a dynasty's greatness its ability to survive, right? I mean, that it surely has to be one of the attributes of greatness for any dynasty, is how well it survives. And the things that the House of Windsor has survived, I was going to say would kill any other dynasty, but they did. They did, in fact. They didn't. There's no subjunctive about it. They did kill every other dynasty that tried to survive such things. So I'm going to go with that. But in both cases, in the Confessions of Young Nero and in the Splendor Before the Dark, we go right back to what I was talking about with the Vanderbilt book, which is that when you fictionalize the past, you are picking a story to tell. Whereas the goal, anyway, not all of them do it. In fact, not a lot of them do. But the goal of biography and history is not to pick a story, just to tell what's in front of you and integrate it somehow, make sense of it somehow, assess the reliability of the different moving parts of it, But the goal, at least for the modern school of biography and history that was largely created by academic Germans, the goal of the modern disciplines is not to go in looking for a story, and especially not to go in intent on telling one story and ignoring everything else. We've seen on this channel brattle-bys of mine, older, more romantic biographies and histories that are still wonderful to read, but where their authors very much did not have that philosophy. They went in, if you think that Philip Sidney is a gallant bravo, you will go in and find that gallant bravo in the sources, and you will tell that story, and nothing will ruffle the feathers of that process. But if you don't do that, if you do what the modern disciplines of history and biography consider to be the canon of ethics, then you won't look for a story. You will tell the story that emerges from your research. But you're not doing that with historical fiction, and I don't think anyone expects you to. That's why I don't understand historical novelists who insist on giving long, kind of shrill, self-justifying author's notes at the end, insisting on the facts, trying to separate precisely where they invented from precisely where they derived from records, when it doesn't matter. If you're putting quotation marks, if you're telling us what someone's thinking, then you have departed from your sources anyway. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're writing in a different genre. To put it mildly, these two books on what a great guy Nero was, they do that. Now, Margaret George in interviews and on panels and whatnot is probably incredibly entertaining on raising these doubts and having this conversation. It's all in good fun. And these novels are really good. She is, of course, a very famous historical novelist. I go tell you a little anecdote about Margaret George from a long time ago. I think there's probably one person watching this video who will actually know what Snake Boy refers to, but I think that she does her best work when she's writing about ancient Rome, and I really hope she does it again. I really do. I hope that she goes back to either East or West. I hope she goes back to ancient Rome. In fact, one idea that has been proposed to her, and that I think she's considered it for a novel, and I would really like to see her do it, would be the Empress Theodora, who hasn't had a really great standalone novel in 10, 20 years. So, but one way or another, these two novels, you can read this without reading The Confessions of Young Nero. In a way, this is a more accomplished novel, but in another way, The Confessions of Young Nero is a strange novel. It's a strange book. I would recommend both of them, but really, I would recommend them almost as completely different, completely separate, almost like they're written by a different person. Certainly not part 1 and part 2. The publicist and a lot of people who talk about these books have compared them to Robert Graves' I, Claudius and Claudius the God. That's not a good comparison, because Claudius the God is a dramatically less effective book if you have not read I, Claudius first. Whereas with these, you can read either one. It's not going to decrease the effectiveness whatsoever. I'm just on the point of authenticity, the point of verisimilitude. I would point out that, I mean, I understand that time and the passage of centuries can dilute and warp our perceptions. They can make bad people seem neutral. They can definitely damn good people with horrible reputations that stick with them and are repeated from generation to generation. I understand the revisionist urge. But we can be sure that Nero was a psychotic monster. In reality, apart from that, a bad PR campaign, we can be surer of that fact than we can of a lot of people in history. A lot of the most reliable historians that come to us from the Roman period actually lived under the reign of Nero and had no reason to lie about it. None. Because they, even when they started to write their histories, once time had made things better. Once the Julio-Claudian dynasty was gone, once you had Nerva and then the Spanish emperors who had interests elsewhere than in clamping down on free speech. So you could, as Tacitus says, you could say what you think, and you could write what you want. Even when that period dawned, and all of a sudden they had a little more expressive freedom, they still had no reason to vilify Nero as worse than he was, because a lot of them had entree at court. And everyone at court, Nerva and Trajan and Hadrian, all alike suffered under the tyranny of Nero. So they would have known if you were lying. And it wouldn't have... I don't... It's like a question that we had with the court historians yesterday about JFK. It's an easy thing to say that these sources were lying. And it makes, in this case, for great, good fun. But I think if you read enough of them balanced against each other, you come away with the idea that this guy probably was a monster. Just in actuality, probably was a monster. But in terms of an alternate take, these are delightfully good. So that comes out in early November. Okay, and I didn't expect the finished copy to be quite so pretty. The finished copy is really nice. That's a very tasteful touch. Okay, great. So we have historical fiction. That's wonderful. So we have The Splendor Before the Dark. Even the title is front-loaded because the era of, well, not so much Nerva, but Trajan and Hadrian and the Antonines was a great era for Roman history. Edward Gibbon called it famously the greatest era. So I don't know what the dark we're referring to is here. Maybe Nero's own dark when his lights are punched out. But in one way or another, we have the Emperor Nero. Then we have Mrs. Vanderbilt. In what's it called? A Well-Behaved Woman. And then On Press, a book on the changing the pivotal moment, the moment in the 60s and 70s when the press changed, when it felt like it had to change. That bit about commentary suddenly becoming the press's responsibility in addition to simple reporting. That's fascinating. And that tells only half the story. That is not failing exclusively of the press. That is also a failing of the American educational system. Since in this book we're obviously talking about the American press. And the reason you would need commentary is if your listening audience was getting dumber and couldn't think it through on their own. Maybe wanted it spoon-fed to them. And once you realize, not just newscasts, but news producers, once networks realize that they have hundreds of thousands of people who are willing to be spoon-fed and watch advertisements, it's interesting because I've read 2 of these books already, and I'm going to reread them, and this one I want to read right away. So that's our early morning mail haul. I don't know that it'll be early morning when I upload this. Probably it'll be annoyingly late as usual. But it's kind of weird to get the U.S. mail before I get FedEx or UPS. That's kind of strange. I like this mail truck driver. We laugh, we chat. So I hope he feels encouraged to stop me at any time that he sees me out on the sidewalk with Frida Bean. Because we're out all the time. Frida can't let herself outside. That's a freedom that I take away from her. So if she has the smallest inclination to go out, even if it seems like a whim, if she just looks at me and says, I kind of feel like going out, jumping on people, then I immediately stop what I'm doing and take her out. Just especially since this is not a dog, unlike my beagles and unlike my girls when they were young, this is not a dog who really cares about traipsing over hill and dale. She really doesn't care about covering distance. She mainly wants to be on a main thoroughfare where there will be people so that she can meet people and go... Her mouth is full of packing material. What are you eating? What are you eating? Look at your fans. There they are. So anyway, so there may be more. That's what I'm trying to say, is that there may be more of these early morning mail hauls, or ninja mail hauls at any time. If this guy feels comfortable doing that, that's fine by me. So I'll wrap this up, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, Book 2.